Great. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Steve Grove here, Commissioner of Deed. I'm joined by the Director of our Labor Market Information Office, Orion Casal, and we're here to cover the August jobs report. Many of you have seen the release, just went out moments ago, but as you'll note, we did see job growth in August. Anytime you see growth, that's a good thing. It did cool compared to July. We had this red hot July in our job market, and in August, it did tail off a little bit, although you still saw 4,300 jobs added to our economy, 6,200 in the private sector. Unemployment rate ticked down to 3.8%. And this, it largely mirrors what happened in the country more broadly. Compared to the United States, we had that kind of 0.3% growth in the private sector in Minnesota, 0.2% growth nationwide. So we did generally track the trajectory of the U.S. And I think after a really strong July, where there was clearly optimism on where our economy was headed and a sense that things in the coronavirus were progressing nicely. We obviously have seen, the Delta variant continue to grow, and that seems to have had at least some effect on the optimism and growth in our economy as we head into the fall. So early signals, we'll see exactly how this plays out in the coming months, but just a great reminder that, the pandemic and the economy are inextricably linked as we come out of this really tumultuous last year and a half. It is worth noting July was even stronger than we thought it was. Again, we saw revisions this month that showed there were actually 2,600 more jobs added in July than we had previously reported. So 3,100 actually in the private sector. So July, again, was just a really banner month. August, again, good growth, just not at the same rate as in July. We saw a huge revision actually in that month of July in accommodation and food services, an industry that we're all following closely given the really difficult years that hospitality has had. We saw an additional 1,200 jobs in July from what we had originally reported. So that was a really good sign for the middle of the summer. So big picture, just to remind ourselves that we did lose 416,000 jobs in those first months of the pandemic, and we've since gained now up to this point 272,700, or 65.5% of the jobs that we lost on a seasonally adjusted basis. So in the private sector in particular, it's been 67% of those jobs have come back. That metric is one we continue to focus on. Job growth is at the center of economic recovery, and that overall picture of Minnesota's job growth is one that we remain laser focused on here at Deed. Over the year, we're up about 110,000 jobs, so 4% growth over the year. Of course, things in January were very different than they are now, so it's been quite the year of the last 8 months. And just to kind of break down some of the job numbers a little bit more deeply, manufacturing was up 2,300 jobs in August. That's a really strong sign always, as one of our key industries here in the state. Leisure and hospitality continued to outpace its usual growth, up 2,000 more jobs in August. If you compare that to 2019, the last August we had where there wasn't a pandemic, we saw about 1,000 jobs in leisure and hospitality, so we're still doubling that rate of comeback. It's not to say those woes that you hear from hospitality managers aren't real. It's just to say we are seeing jobs come back in that space slowly but surely, and we certainly hope that continues through the fall. Losses in government this month were significant, down about 1,900 in government. I think there's just some staffing challenges there over the summer that we're going to see. It'll be very interesting to see the September report, of course, as kids go back to school in terms of growth in government, as education plays such an outsized role in that category more broadly. So that kind of breaks down the job growth. We do continue to see hourly average wage rates go up. They've risen about $1 since August, or over the year rather, and since August of 2019, wages are up 8%. So an 8% growth in wages over the last 2 years certainly outpaces inflation, and a good sign that wages are continue to increase for workers who need that money to be in a situation where they have a family sustaining wage. Average hourly wages for all private sector workers rose even faster for production workers and retail trade, up 5%, and up 10% actually from 2019. And food and drinking places, wages are up 10.5% from August of 2020 and up 13% from 2019. For some of those very specific industries that we know are facing unique challenges, the wage growth is clearly showing that employers are having to raise wages to get workers in a very, very tight labor market. In terms of our labor force participation rate, it held largely steady at 67.8%. That was the same rate as last month. So not a lot of nudge upwards there. And we talked about this a little bit last month on this call, but we, in conjunction with the state demographer, have been projecting labor force participation rates for some time, and had already seen in the coming years, a projected drop off from our 70%, which is where we were kind of before the pandemic. So some of this is following those trends for which demography plays a huge role, regardless of the pandemic, and some of it clearly has been accelerated by the pandemic. We'll continue to look at those numbers very closely throughout the fall. The U.S. rates in labor force participation is 61.7%. So we still run hot by about 16% on labor force participation rate compared to the country. It's a good sign. And one of the unique insights, and Orion, who's an expert in this area, can share more, but that we saw in labor force participation and on unemployment rate is that there's a clear sign of a tight labor market when you see a huge increase in the number of teenagers going to work. And the unemployment rate for teenagers decreased to 6.2% in August, which is down 4.8 percentage points over the year. It's the second lowest August teen unemployment rate on record, dating back to 2002. And it's the only time August teen unemployment rate was lower. The only time that it was lower was in August of 2018 at 5.7%. So again, as firms are looking to hire and finding workers in a tight market, they're going to younger people as well. And I think that's one of the unique data points that we saw in August, is that rate dropped significantly down to 6.2%. One of the things we try to consistently track is just the ways in which our economic data exposes disparities in our economy. And we've been reporting for some time the 12-month rolling average on the unemployment rate in our state. And I think we've been pretty honest about the fact that the unemployment rate isn't the best economic health indicator in our economy today, just given some of the labor force dynamics at play and the really unique pandemic-oriented economy, or pandemic recovery economy we're in. So we did something unique this month, and I'll be honest with you, we're kind of experimenting with new data sets to see what can give us the best insight. And one of the things we've done this month is create something called the pandemic adjusted unemployment rate. And what this does is it takes the unemployment rate across racial groups and figures in the fact that there's been labor force participation decreases as well. And so it adds up some of those metrics, and Orion can get into some of the more details, but it adds sort of unemployment rate and labor force participation rate into one figure to try to show where the gaps are. Because if workers are kind of giving up on the market or dropping out of the job search, that is also a different kind of unemployment in a sense. So we want to combine those two figures to show the disparities. You'll see that in the press release today, but just to briefly highlight it here, the white pandemic adjusted unemployment rate is 5.9% in Minnesota. The black pandemic adjusted unemployment rate is 8.4%. So almost 3 full points higher. It gives you a sense that those disparities are very real. And we're just trying to find better ways to examine that using the data. So we'll continue to look at that moving forward and find other ways to understand more deeply what's happening too. So, a month of job growth, certainly not sizzling job growth, but job growth nonetheless, and in some categories that are really critical. Obviously, this is the month at which the unemployment insurance benefits from the federal government have ceased to be in effect, and it's too early to tell exactly what the data has shown us on that. We'll be tracking that, of course, in the coming weeks as Minnesotans are in a different employment situation and have different aid packages, which I think, amongst many, many other things as we head into this fall, is going to make for an interesting and really important inflection point for our economy. I do want to highlight that we're really excited about this council that the governor announced earlier this week, the Governor's Council on Minnesota's Economic Expansion, a really powerful and important way for us to get great feedback from private sector leaders, from community leaders on where we should take our economy, how we can best direct ARP dollars to grow the economy. So we're excited about that, and we'll continue to share updates on that as we go. All the meetings are public, and really eager to get great advice from great leaders in our state. So with that, I'll turn it over to Orion for a bit more detail. Orion.
Thank you. So this is the graph that shows both the seasonally adjusted job growth as well as the unemployment rate for August. As the commissioner said, we gained 4,300 jobs in August, up 0.2%. Private sector gained 6,200, up 0.3%. The unemployment rate ticked down just 1/10, down to where are we? Down to 3.8. And that now, as of August, we're now 11,400 people above in the unemployment rate above where we were in February 2020. In terms of the number of employed workers, we added employed workers into the economy in August, and we're now at 2 million, a little over 2,900,000 employed workers, but that's still 97,600 lower than in February 2020. In August, we added 888 workers in total in the labor market. And that brings us to 86,000 people short of where we were in February 2020. So, basically those, that decrease in the number of employed workers are the people that we want to, bring back into the labor force. So that's really a combination of people who have dropped out of the labor force and the tick up of people who are unemployed. And that's about 97, a little over 97,000 workers who we've essentially lost from employment, from jobs. And those are the folks that, we're working towards, and they're working towards coming back into the labor market. So to kind of illustrate that, breaking that out by demographic, you can go to the next graph. Yep. This graph, I know it's kind of busy, but it breaks out that combination of people who have left the labor market since the pandemic, since February 2020, plus the total unemployed, and as a percentage of the civilian population, civilian labor force population. So this graph, basically it adds the unemployment rate and the change in the labor force participation rate since February 2020, prior to the pandemic, to show the total share of Minnesotans who are either actively seeking work or who would have been expected to be working or actively seeking work if it weren't for the pandemic. And so you can see that for Black workers in Minnesota, that would bring their pandemic adjusted unemployment rate to 8.4%. For Hispanic workers, 4.7%, and for white workers, 5.9%. You can also see that Hispanic workers actually saw their labor force participation rate tick up during this period, and that's why the blue bars are below the zero mark. Black workers saw the biggest decline in labor force participation during this period. So going to the next slide, this graphs men and women. So using the same analysis, women's pandemic adjusted unemployment rate is 6.4% and men's is 6.3%. So really neck and neck there. Women men have seen, men and women in this state have not exactly followed the patterns nationally. Women have seen much less decline in labor force participation, but now they're also seeing a larger rise in unemployment. So it's very unusual to see women's unemployment higher than men's unemployment rate in this state. And that's what we've been seeing for the last couple of months. So we can go, yep. So just digging into the monthly numbers just a little bit more, manufacturing had its second month of really strong job growth, adding 2,300 jobs, primarily in durable goods. Both durable and non-durable goods saw a lot of strength over the year, and strength even compared to the US numbers in terms of job growth. Leisure and hospitality continued to add jobs for the 8th consecutive month, and has added almost 44,000 jobs over the year. So that's 20% growth over the year. The fastest pace of hiring, the fast pace of hiring in leisure and hospitality has really led to some wage increases in that sector. Average hourly wages are now $18 an hour in Minnesota in this sector. This is really unprecedented. We haven't seen this kind of growth in wages in this low wage sector ever. And particularly in food services and drinking places where just for the production workers, so non-supervisory, non-managerial, wages have been consistently over $16 an hour for the past 4 months straight. So trade, transportation, and utilities saw all of their job growth in August in the wholesale trade sector. That was up 2,300 jobs. But over the year, all three components have shown good growth: retail trade, transportation, warehousing, and utilities, as well as wholesale trade. Financial activities saw growth in both the real estate rental and leasing side, as well as the finance and insurance side. But over the year, finance and insurance has been losing jobs. And that's one of just two sectors that's seen over the year job loss. So in terms of the industry, the sectors that have lost jobs, government lost jobs in all three components: federal, state, and local, in August. And the August is a challenging month in terms of seasonally adjusting the government jobs number because of schools. So schools come back at slightly different times every year. It's a huge number of people coming back into the labor into jobs, and so the seasonal adjustment can get a little off. But over the year, local government was really, really strong, adding 13,800 jobs, up 5.5%, while both the federal and state levels lost jobs. Educational and health services lost jobs in August. And what we're seeing here is that nursing and residential care facilities have been losing jobs over the year. They're down 5,200 jobs, or 4.9%. So this is some combination of staffing challenges and consolidation in the industry, but there have been staffing challenges in this industry for many years, and they seem to be getting worse, not better at this point. And then other services saw its first seasonally adjusted job loss since February, down 600, but since February, on a seasonally adjusted basis, it's added 5,500 jobs. So strong job growth there. And information continued its long slide after a pause in June and July, and also mining and logging lost 100 jobs in August. So just a brief overview of what's going on in the industry sectors. And then the last slide is just that seasonally adjusted job loss and recovery by sector in Minnesota, where we're seeing that construction has regained all of the jobs that it's lost since the pandemic, and it's now up 100 on a seasonally adjusted basis. So we'll keep tracking that and see if it continues to show growth over and above February 2020's level. Other sectors that are very close to having gained all their jobs back: professional, scientific, and technical services, arts, entertainment, and recreation, retail, trade, educational services, other services, and accommodation, and food services. So they're all in the 70 to 95% range of having gained back all the jobs that they've lost since February 2020. Finance Financial activities has made up some ground, but it remains, let's see, financial activities is now actually, it had been losing jobs over this period. It's actually made up a little bit of ground, and now it's showing some gains. And the industries that continue to lose jobs by this measure are management of companies and mining and logging, as well as information. And I think we're going to take questions now. I see a couple of people have their hands up.
Great. Yeah, let's go to Peter. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, hey, thank you. Can I ask you about the trust fund and the health of the trust fund? Last I asked you was in December, and at that point, the state had borrowed $883 million from the federal government. Could you give us a condition report on the trust fund and whether you have developed plans to repay or perhaps even seek forgiveness?
Yeah, Peter, it's a great question. I'm just looking up the numbers in front of me right now. So the trust fund ended the week of, I want to say September 5th, at a negative 1.13 billion deficit. So that number has remained largely steady. It's gone up and down a little bit as receipts and payments have drawn and equalized. But there's a very specific and time-honored process for how a trust fund is paid back. There's a complex set of taxes that are leveraged to ensure that that happens. It is specifically designed to take that repayment schedule and pull it out over a long period of time so as not to immediately make life harder on companies when they're trying to get out of a difficult economic time. So this is all written up in statute and federal law, and we can do a deeper dive with you on it if helpful, separate from this conversation. But I'll say that we do have a pathway by which we pay back the UI Trust Fund. We're confident that we can do that over time. There are always conversations in Washington about getting additional money into states to repay trust fund deficits. And there's certainly conversations at the state legislature about that as well. We would be thrilled if the federal government continued to consider additional aid specifically for this this challenge, because this system in Minnesota and in so many other states really kept our workers afloat during an incredibly challenging, cataclysmic year and a half of our economy for those workers for whom their businesses had to be closed to save lives. So we think that this system had to bend and reshape itself to keep our economy going, and that we would love the federal government's help in doing that. But we do have a system by which this is repaid back over time, so as to make sure that we're working hand in hand with employers and doing that in a really fair way.
Okay, very, very quick follow-up. You suspended experience rating during 2020. Is that returned?
The experience rating moving forward, no, that expires. We not with the legislature. I mean, we could discuss it with them in the future, but the experience rating will normalize now moving forward. I think with the end of the pandemic, unemployment insurance programs in the start of September, you're seeing the system return back to a more normal state of affairs, and so all those things that happen as taxes adjust to repay these trust fund deficits will start to kick into gear. And again, it will happen over time such that no employer will have some sudden new bill that asks them to pay back money for which kept their employees afloat during a challenging year.
Thank you.
Jared, to you.
Hi, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the job growth in the manufacturing industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was positive the last month. I think over 2,000 jobs, and it is an industry that is the second largest industry in our entire state. It's over 50 billion of our GDP every year, so it's really important. I will say, just anecdotally, in talking to manufacturing employers, they are struggling to hire workers like every other industry. I think there's this perception out there sometimes that these jobs are somehow not career track or they're low tech. In fact, the more manufacturing companies you talk with, the more you'll see that in fact these jobs are incredibly high tech and have great career potential and pay way more money on average than the typical job in the state. But Oriana, do you want to say anything more specifically about the August growth numbers there?
Yeah, the August growth numbers were particularly strong in durable goods. And in terms of durable goods, what we're seeing is very strong over the year job growth numbers in wood products manufacturing, transportation equipment manufacturing, medical equipment and supplies manufacturing, and then miscellaneous manufacturing also has medical related industries in it. And that's also doing well. And then, as we've talked about in the past, the food manufacturing sector and non-durable goods has remained very strong in Minnesota, even compared to the nation.
Thank you. Brian, over to you.
Hey, could you talk more about the $18 an hour average wage in the leisure sector? Does that include any kind of gratuity, sign-on, retention? And can you also just provide more basis of comparison so you can understand why that stood out to you?
Sure, it does in theory include gratuity, but employers have to actually include it. So what we see across the board is that that employers don't always follow the letter of the law in terms of how they report gratuity in terms of their taxes, and so that's also reflected in our numbers. So it should include gratuity. It doesn't always. But yes, in terms of how that compares to previous periods, let me just get those numbers real quick here. So in terms of food services and drinking places specifically, try that again. So since May, we've seen wages there over $16 an hour. They're now on average, this is for production workers, at $16.27 an hour. Previous to that, so for example, last year and previous, we really have never seen anything over high $14 an hour. So bumping up to $15 an hour, but we've never seen anything like 16 and a quarter. And that's specifically food services and drinking places that I'm looking at right now.
And you're saying it's a flat 18 now or 18 plus? What's the?
Well, okay, so you're going back to the leisure and hospitality, and those numbers right now are $18.03 in August for an average hourly wage. Comparing that to previous periods, skipping 2020, which was kind of an oddball time, 17 and a half was more typical.
Brian, one follow-up before we go to Kavita on that, just for some further context. The cost of living for a typical family in Minnesota, which would include one parent working full-time, one part-time, and one child, is $18.85 an hour. So as you think about those jobs and the wages they provide and what that means for families, $18.85 is a good reference point as you think through some of these dynamics. But it is good to see those numbers going up. I think maybe we have time for one more. Kavita, can we go to you?
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the slowing of job growth we saw in August. Obviously, you mentioned Delta was probably an issue there. So are you seeing to any extent that I know some sectors are still obviously, struggling to hire workers, but are you seeing some sectors beginning to pare back hiring a little bit, given the concerns about the Delta variant, or do you think the slowing is more about worker confidence and worker concerns about COVID and childcare issues?
It's a great question. I think it's hard to say. I don't want to get too predictive on these month-by-month numbers. We continue to look at these kind of 3-month windows to understand more broadly what the trend lines are. I can just share kind of anecdotally in talking to employers. I have not heard employers, tell me they're slowing down hiring or giving up. I think many of them saw the fall, particularly with the return back to school and what that means for the childcare situation for so many families, is a chance to really actually accelerate their efforts on recruitment and retention. I think you continue to see, as we've talked about several times on this call and elsewhere, some really creative solutions out there by employers to tackle this issue. childcare remains just a major focus, and you'll see more from us on that in the coming weeks and months. The number of childcare dollars we have at Deed to help grow that market are significant and at a record rate compared to the past. And in that first meeting we had this week of the Economic Expansion Council the governors put together, this theme of childcare came up time and again as we kind of went around the horn to those 15 members who will be advising us. So yeah, I think that's a key component going into the fall. I do think that Delta is having an effect on our economy, to be sure. Again, we have a record-sized jobs bill, but we'd give up a lot of it if we could trade it for the number of vaccines we have in our state. If people are vaccinated, if workers feel safe, consumer confidence is there, it just completely changes our economic picture. And I think especially heading into these fall months, this cooler weather, people heading indoors, I think there's a sense of we've got to get these next few months right in our economy if we want to see it grow. And a big part of that is how we manage this public health situation and the ways in which employers and government work together on this. I mean, you see some really unique strategies on vaccines, whether it be mandates or insurance premiums or encouragements. And I think we all know that our economy is more productive when we can get back together in person versus just being remote. I mean, I think we'll all live in a hybrid world moving forward, but boy, when I talk to employers, like they are thirsting for that ability to interact and engage in ways that increase productivity too. So a lot of factors here to your question, and I think we'll see in this fall. These next few jobs reports are going to be very interesting with all the factors we have at play heading into the fall. So more to come. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, you can follow up directly with us at Deed if you have further questions on the data or want to get into certain details. We appreciate you joining us today, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.